Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we have a very special guest today. It's our honor to have with us Scott Horton. He, of course, needs no introduction to Gagglers. He's the host of the eponymous show, the Scott Horton Show. He's the author of many books. He's been a podcaster and an author and a commentator for many, many years. And it's a great honor for us to have you join us. And I just want to start the discussion off with something that's in a way rather baffling, which is that for 4 years we had been hearing from Trump. He's the peace president. He's sick to death of the neocons, the forever wars. These are all stupid wars the United States should not be involved in. This preceded the 2024 campaign, and now that he's in office, he has not only made an abrupt reversal, getting more and more mired in Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, at least as much, if not more so, than Biden. But he's taking risks that he hadn't even taken during his first term. He was kind of risk averse during his first term, particularly when it came to bombing Iran, signing off on Israel's annexation plans, and so on. So I just want to wonder, Scott, do you have any explanation of why Trump has taken this turn, which I don't think is a good idea for him, but do you have any sense of why he's done this?
Well, man, I'm afraid that, well, first of all, I have to say it's an honor to be with both of y'all today. And George, I'm just such a huge fan of your book, Bombs for
Thank you
Peace.
so much, Scott.
I relied on it so much in writing Provoked, and I learned so much from it. And it's just really great to be here with you guys. Got to say that first. And then, and I'm a big fan of your show too, Peter. um, but look, so for Trump, I mean, the reality is, right, that all presidents say this. The only president in my lifetime who didn't run on peace, well, I don't know if Bill Clinton kind of ran to the right of H.W. Bush on Palestine and China a bit. I don't know about the rest. He said some reasonable things about Iran and Iraq during the campaign. But W. Bush, of course, ran on a humble foreign policy. Barack Obama, of course, ran on ending the Iraq war explicitly and changing the entire mindset that gets us into these conflicts and all of that kind of thing. Donald Trump, of course, ran on anti-war in 2016. Joe Biden is the only one who ran on, I'm going to escalate this thing. Donald Trump ain't tough enough. Because that was the whole narrative of his first term, was that he was a sellout and an installed commie traitor. And so now we needed to get back to normalcy, which was like the W. Bush years, right? And so, that was what Biden ran on and somehow won. And then so Trump here is running on peace again, because that's what the American people want. And the deal about Americans is like, there's a reason we're way over here in North America. It's because our grandparents and great grandparents said, enough of this. We want to flee the chaos of the old world and move to the new world where we can just have a little peace and quiet and be free and mind our own business. And so, and just you look at the map, Eurasia couldn't really be our own business, could it? I mean, this is the middle part of North America. And so the people in the country feel very detached from the goings on over there. I'll give you a great example. When Russia rolled in, and this isn't the whole story, but I'm telling only part of it. When Russia rolled into Georgia in 2008, Americans, many of them, were truly terrified that Russia was attacking the United States. They had no idea that there was another country called Georgia out there, or if they did, we always call it former Soviet Georgia so that we know what we're talking about. They still don't know where that is, right? The Caspian Sea, I mean, that's Prince Caspian is from the Narnia novels, right? This stuff is like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It has nothing to do with the American people. And so, in fact, like you can work out the cognitive dissonance. If Russia was attacking former Soviet Georgia, why would that even be a headline? Right? If it's a headline, they're probably talking about our Georgia between South Carolina and Florida. Oh my God, people are calling their parents to see if they're okay. People are really afraid because they're that detached. And so my thing is, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. That's how we are supposed to be. But the problem is, we can't bring our government with us. We can't get our government to behave the way that we would because, in fact, because of our freedom and our independence, we, at least in history, had been the most prosperous people, which means that we could, more than anyone else, and also because we were separated from the rest of the world during the Second World War, we could afford to build up the industrial capacity to create a globe spanning Navy and a permanent 100,000 or million man standing army, spread throughout the world and all of the things to create the world empire. So our government has made the whole world our business, even though the American people recognize that no, it's not. So when somebody wants to be a
but that's by
president,
design. But that's by design. But
yeah,
that's by design. Okay, because I can remember in a different iteration of my life, I was a lecturer at the University of California, Davis, and I taught them modern European history, and there was two parts, from 1900 to 1945, 1945 to the present. Okay. And the first course I gave, I said, we're going to be looking at such luminaries as Woodrow Wilson, and we're going to be looking at Adolf Hitler, Churchill, FDR, et cetera, et cetera. And after the lecture, people would come up to me, what do I need to get an A, number one? And, oh yeah, this Hitler guy, cool uniforms. I'm interested in this. I said, that's University of California level of awareness. But see, that's the dichotomy. I mean, the United States is a global empire. It is in every part of the world, but most Americans don't know that. That's by design, Scott.
sure. And then, so if you want to be the chief executive and the commander in chief, you have to run on peace. You have to tell the American people, look, man, we're going to leave your money in your pocket, or at the very least, we're going to tax it, but we're going to spend it on schools and healthcare and infrastructure for you. When instead, like, no, we have dams collapsing, bridges falling down. As Ron Paul put it way back in 2008, he goes, we're guarding the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but we don't have anybody guarding our border. And we got like literally tens of millions of illegal immigrants just pouring into the country, completely not immigration, but mass migration of people coming in. And we're over there securing the border between Iraq and Syria, between Afghanistan and Pakistan.
So
We're
it's a con
blowing
job.
up bridges and building new bridges in
Right.
these other countries when our bridges are falling down because they're 70 years old.
Right.
It's
So,
just insane.
so you're saying it's like a con job. So every president campaigns on saying the last thing we want is to have boots on the ground, in all these countries. No, no, we want to focus on our own
And you know
domestic
what?
issues. We don't want, no, no, we don't want an empire. We don't, the last thing we want. We want to, every single one makes that promise, and not one of them ever fulfills that promise.
Okay, but let's stipulate for the sake of argument here that Donald Trump really is, I don't know, Rand Paul at heart, if not Ron. Okay, I don't really believe that, but let's pretend like he really would like to roll this thing back. And quite frankly, like he is in a sense a Buchananite. He is in a sense a paleo con who, like, clearly when it comes to economics, not that he's good on this stuff and really understands it very well, but he wants a trade policy that's bent, a national policy by the national government that's bent to benefit the United States of America, not hurt the American people, as long as we get to still have bases in Europe and Asia, right? Which has been the deal for the last, 50 years or so. Is we'll drop all tariffs on you, but you get to keep all your tariffs on us as long as we get to control your foreign policy and all that. So he is changing that dynamic. This is not exactly the Rockefeller world empire under his control. At the same time, though, put yourself in his position, right? Where what would he have to really do, guys, to change it? He would have to abolish the American empire. He would have to give a speech called "Today is the first day of the rest of our lives. We are coming home from Korea, Japan, Germany, Italy, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and the Persian Gulf, and everywhere. We're going to keep some of our Navy to float off our shores and let everybody know that they better not mess with us. We're going to encourage dialogue and diplomacy and peace conferences between the other powers of the earth so that they don't fight, hopefully. But we are no longer the guarantor of every nation's borders in the world. Because just quite frankly, the way they set it up, the idea was, well, the American people can't afford it. But then the reality is, no, we cannot either. Okay. The world is too big and it costs too much. So at some point, we have to stop. But now, if you're the president and you do that, and even better, I mean, you'd have to go ahead and make some other reforms too with the rest of the national government, the national security apparatus as it exists in Washington, all the contractors, all of the we're talking $1.7 trillion a year, according to Winslow Wheeler, in the national security budget, right? So that's a lot of extremely powerful corporations have to get kicked off of welfare there. So you have to, the
Scott, they
president have
would.
to wear Kevlar and a helmet at all times.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean,
And he would,
he'd be JFK'd.
Well, and look, and even if whatever he had a magical force field, he still would be absolutely forcing a catastrophic recession, right? A massive dislocation in the American people's economic fortune. We have what David Stockman calls the great deformation, where all these bubbles that pop that we talk about, those are all the little bubbles on top of the big bubble of post-war inflationary money and militarism and the diversion of our free economy into a defense-based industry. So in my book, my last book, Enough Already, I have the last chapter on Trump begins with a quote. We got to stop the military industrial complex. They're terrible and we got to stop them. And then the second quote is, boy, they sure like war. The military industrial complex, there's so much money at stake. Don't let you tell them they don't like war. They do. They love it. And then the third quote is, we want Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and Grumman to be successful and to be the biggest and best in the world and whatever. Because at the end of the day, what's he going to do? He's really going to cut them off and he's really going to completely crash the economy. But just tell the American people, don't worry. All these people are going to get real jobs and it's going to work out in like a year and a half. Be cool, right? Like he's not going to last, right? You'd have to have a real consensus among the American people that we know that our government has distorted our economy terribly. And that when we end our empire, we're going to suffer a hell of a correction. But don't worry, have faith in freedom. We're going to work it out. But he would have to have run on that, not just I'm going to end the war in Ukraine, but I am going to change the way things run around here like you thought you were voting for when you voted for Barack Obama. That's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to end this empire. And, that, in other words, it'd have to be Ron. It would have to be Ron and and willing to absolutely take the heat because he knows he's right. And he knows in the end it's going to be okay. But I mean, seriously, imagine firing a few million government employees all at the same time. You guys are going to have to get a real job somewhere. It would be a real problem for a time anyway, until they could find productive work.
Yeah. Yeah. But
I think that would be very, very popular, but we all know for the reasons that you just explained, the economy is too much intertwined with empire, and that's what, and that's I think it's eventually doomed. Okay, hopefully avoiding a thermonuclear war. George, do you want to get anything specific? Because
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, Scott, it's great having you here because I've been following your work for a very, very long time. And your book Provoked, which I haven't read it, but I've read enough of it and heard enough people talk about it that we're on the same page, okay? What I think is important here is people like yourself, people like Max Blumenthal, these are not, you're not part of the adults in the room, okay? It's very much a different trend right now. The academy is broken. The great scholars at the Hoover Institute and all of that, you have dethroned them. And a lot of people don't like you for doing that, okay? Because when you're given an airing, I liked your interview with Tucker Carlson. This is such a wealth of information and a worldview that have been denied the general public for the entirety of my life. And you can know these things. You've researched it. And you know these things. I know these things, and you're making it knowable to a general public. And how do you feel about playing that role? Because the internet, these podcasts, and all that have given people like yourself the recognition that you deserve. We don't need a Harvard professor. We don't need MIT. We don't need the Hoover Institute. And you're authentic. You're honest. You have, I would even say, a moral mission here. And I think that's why it's being so welcomed.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, and also thank you for mentioning my name in the same breath with Max Blumenthal. That's an honor. He's one hell of a journalist. I'm the guy who interviews Max about the stuff that he learns and teaches the rest of us. I mean, he does really cutting edge stuff. So thank you for that. I take that as a very high compliment. Like right at the real dawn of the era that you're talking about, like when it was really, really first getting started, is right when I quit doing my show to go write books instead. Right. It was when I should have been making my show into a YouTube show, I went and shut myself away and started writing books. And especially the last book took me like 2.5 years. And I had no choice but to absolutely divorce myself from Twitter in order to concentrate, because I can't use it. I can only abuse it. Right. Like some kind of bad addiction. So no Twitter for me. And then, so like, I really kind of counted myself out of the race that you're talking about of the new young guys overthrowing the, well, I'm pretty old for a young guy, but you know what I mean? The new guys overthrowing the old regime. But
Oh,
so
you're a young Turk. You're a young Turk.
I'm catching up there. And the books do help because then I'm not just an interview host. I'm now the guy that wrote these books that have information in them and whatever. So that's, helped. And then, but I do think essentially along the lines of what you're saying is, when people can hear me on Tucker Carlson say these things, well, even just take Tucker himself. And I thought about this long and hard, believe me, before that interview ever happened, before I ever got invited on there, that if I could ever get on Tucker, like, here's how it would go, kind of thing. And my whole idea was I know that he knows enough that he's going to know about everything that I mentioned, but he's not going to know all of what I'm telling him, but he's going to know I'm right the whole time. He's going to understand, oh, that was why that happened, kind of thing. I'm going to be, you know what I mean? Like, I know that he's really learned in this stuff, but mostly from the other side of the story for like 2/3 of the time. Right. And then, so that was my whole goal, is like, can I walk him through enough already, essentially from beginning to end, and, and not lose him. And if I can do that without losing him, then I can hopefully do that without losing the audience, and like really praying that all the pot resin in my brain doesn't prevent me from staying on track and make me forget what I was saying or whatever. And I did pull it off. I was able to, with no edits, I was able to keep going through. And then in fact, after this today, unlike last time, I got to get a belly full of food. And then I'm going to go do another 5 hours with Lex Friedman. And we're going to do all the way through Enough Already, plus Israel, Palestine. And then we're going to do 2 more hours. Supposedly this was the agreement. Then we're going to do 2 more hours on Provoked at the end about Russia and Ukraine and the Cold War. So that's the goal. And then, the last time I was on there, I debated Mark Dubowitz and it didn't go well. But like the comments section hated me. Oh, they hated me. But then I came back in like a week and the comment section loved me. It was just like Lex Friedman's original kind of crew. They did not cotton to this very well. You know what I mean? But like overall, like once the full hundreds of thousands had heard it, there were a lot of people who were like, hey man, like that guy made a lot of really good points and I want to read about that and whatever, this kind of thing. So
How do you feel when you go on Piers Morgan's show? Because Glenn Greenwald said, I hate going on that show because often it just becomes a shout fest and
Yeah.
people throwing out insults, like basically on schoolyard level insults. So
Well,
I don't think you've ever been the victim of that, but quite often it does
Yeah,
degenerate into that.
as
I have.
Jimmy Dore described it, I think is very appropriate. Monkeys in a zoo throwing shit at each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the reality is I fit in perfectly there, dude. I get angry as hell. I talk, like yesterday I debated General Clark again, or day before yesterday. They had me for the 3rd time. I went up against General Clark on there. And so I call him General and I try to be respectful because like I did interrupt him though. And like, come on, what are you talking about, General? This and that. But like I didn't get too rowdy. But there have been times. In fact, the first time I was on there,
I
some guy,
remember.
this guy thinks this and this guy thinks that. And I was like, why don't you argue with something I actually said, you dumb bastard? And then people went and made a meme out of that and all this stuff, because I can,
Yeah.
when fists start flying, man, I'll get in there. You know what I mean? I'm just a skater kid. I'm not like you said, I'm not from Harvard or whatever. I'm not really even a grown up, quite frankly, like all the white in my beard
Yeah,
notwithstanding.
but my point is, Scott, is so we don't need those people. Those
Yeah.
people were the problem. And I think that you're an exemplar of that. Max is an
Yeah.
exemplar of that. Okay. Even Jimmy Dore, who's just a comedian and and good natured and well intentioned. I mean, again, you can see him learning. I explained to him right before the special military operation in Ukraine. I explained to him the entire history from 2000, well, 1991, then 2014, and then right up there. To this day, I'm very happy. That is his chronology. That is
Uh-huh.
his chronology when he
Yeah.
talks about it. And I'm very happy to have
Right.
been part of that. But you're doing exactly the same thing. When we had the cable gate, when WikiLeaks dumped all of the cables and all of that,
Mhm.
I could, because I remember I went to an event right before the pandemic, and I said, WikiLeaks, thank God we had WikiLeaks because I knew I knew these different nodes of information. I wasn't sure exactly how they fit together. And then the cables dropped, and I said, I am not insane. I actually This is
Yeah.
what I thought. Now I can connect the dots. I know this meeting and this person and this article. It all makes sense now. That's what you do, I think.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. In fact, like, so my show, I've done 6,000 interviews. And basically, I have my own timeline in my head of my own lifetime, right? Of like, I've always been interested in politics, whatever, since the Ronald Reagan years when I was a little kid, kindergarten and stuff. And first launched the space shuttle and all of these things, Morning in America and all that. Like, I was always very political. And so I have my own timeline that I'm trying to fill in the gaps. And I guess this is probably also due to the influence of libertarianism and Austrian school economics, where for a libertarian, whenever anything is wrong, we always ask, what did government do to make it this way in the first place? What is it we need to repeal to fix it instead of what do we need to do to fix the problem they caused in the first place? So that's kind of the way we're bent anyway. So then when I look at foreign policy, I go, well, I know what the government did to make the problem in the first place, right? And then I could just start you with Jimmy Carter and walk you all the way through when we're talking about the Middle East, or it's easier to just start at the end of the Cold War the last time. And then what do we do to make it this way? Here are a bunch of decisions we didn't have to make. And what's the proof we didn't have to make them? Well, here were the arguments at the time. And the dissenters were right. And the proponents won anyway. And then they did it again and again and again and again. They do all the worst things. They ignore all the warnings. In fact, I make a joke in the recent book that we already have what's called Horton's Law, which says that a politician will always break any good promise and keep all the bad ones, right? And then so now the corollary to Horton's Law is that a president will always take the very worst foreign policy advice of his hawkish advisors and ignore even their warnings about what might happen if you were to follow through on the advice. So, for example, Kissinger and Brzezinski saying, we need to do this and we need to do this. However, we better be really cautious because if we do that, then that could cause a real problem. So we want to make sure that we do it this way, not that way. Nobody pays attention when they say that, right? Yeah, we got to expand NATO. But like, wait, Zabig says we better come up with a special status for Ukraine to guarantee their permanent neutrality so that it doesn't become a fight. Because if we try to take Ukraine, the Russians are going to freak and they're going to break it and not let us do it. So that was the leading hawk is the one who said that. So like ipso facto, sorry, confirmation bias rules kick in here. I'm right because even Zbigniew Brzezinski said that this is what is going to happen if you follow my idiot advice. You know what I mean? It's like, it's right there. And so then that's the story. So then, back to your point. Another great example for me is I've been interviewing all these guys through all the years of the Iraq War and Afghanistan and all these things. And then I'll never forget the day. I still know who it was. There's a guy, you may have never heard of him. He's very obscure. His name is Joel Wing. And he's, I think, a high school teacher from out in Oregon or something. And just all he cares about is Iraq. He's read every book ever written about Iraq. He's written book reviews of every book ever written about Iraq. He knows everything. That's all he writes about, all he cares about, old, current, new politics and everything going on there. So whenever I want to like catch up on Iraqi politics and whatever, this guy's just so immersed. And I one day found a book review that he wrote where he stipulates the all the way zoomed in exact reason why Bush Sr. betrayed the Shiite uprising in 1991. We all know that he encouraged it and then betrayed it. But Joel Wing had this thing, and it's the magic word, man. This is the key. Now my timeline's complete. What happened was it was the Badr Brigade, the militia of the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. These were the Iraqis who had fled to Iran at the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War and had taken Iran's side. Now they were the ones coming back to lead the revolution. And so the Bush guys who had just spent, they were all the Ronald Reagan guys too. They had just spent a decade supporting Saddam to contain the Iranian revolution. Now they realize not only are they going to put the Shiites in power, they're going to put Shiites who are absolutely in league with Tehran in power in Baghdad. And so that was why they called it off. And then skip a few. These are the same people that W. Bush took to power in 2003, right? But then that's also the reason once they betrayed the uprising, that's then why they had to stay in Saudi Arabia to protect the Shiites, supposedly, even though the insurrection was over. It's not like Saddam was going to kill every last one of them or whatever, but that was the excuse to stay in Saudi. And that's what turned the bin Ladenites against the United States, even while we're still backing them. As George so perfectly documented in Bombs for Peace, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and then on in Chechnya as well.
But it's
And so,
curious that, yeah, curiously enough, George H.W. Bush was among the more cautious
yeah.
foreign policy presidents because, in a way, his first instinct was not to encourage uprisings against Saddam Hussein, and then he kind of went along and said, "Yeah, he did encourage it because, remember when he went to Ukraine and he warned them against suicidal nationalism." And he
Mhm.
actually made the point, he remembered, oh, I remember what happened in 1956 when we encouraged the Hungarians to rise up against the Soviet Union, and then we just left them in the lurch, and then we let them actually to be crushed. And so he said, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that in Ukraine. So I think he didn't want to. I think his instinct was not to encourage uprisings against Saddam Hussein, but then he was persuaded to change his position, and then I guess he reversed again in just in abandoning them. But I think his initial instinct was always in favor of caution.
Yeah, although he didn't have to do that war at all, right? I mean,
No, I
it's
get that. Yeah.
on a curve.
But
Yeah,
but I think even you pointed that it was Margaret Thatcher who kind of pushed
yeah,
him into it. I think you
that's
said
right.
that. But now's not the time to go wobbly, George, because she thought he was going to go wobbly. He was going to do a deal.
Yep. And in fact, it's really complicated kind of mess. And I don't think this was deliberate. I really think this is a left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing kind of thing, where you had CIA and CENTCOM were telling the Kuwaitis to tell Saddam to go to hell, while the State Department was telling Saddam, boy, I wouldn't take that from them if I were you. I don't know why you don't just take back the northern oil fields. That's what I would do on a Thursday. But then at the Defense Department, you had Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at that time. And he was freaking out and was telling Dick Cheney, we got to tell Saddam, don't you dare. So they sent him a letter telling him, don't you dare. Or they had Bush send him a letter. But then the wording was too soft. And they were like, oh, crap. It seemed like maybe it was another flashing yellow light. They're like, geez, we're mildly concerned with your actions or whatever. And then they were like, oh, no, let's send another letter. But then it was too late. So on one hand, we're telling the Kuwaitis to be intransigent and not negotiate. On the other hand, we're telling Saddam Hussein, boy, I wouldn't take that from them if I were you. And then on the other hand, we're going, oh, wait, no, stop, don't do that. But then not enough.
Yeah, but what you're saying here, and I think it can apply across the board, is that there are the empire is controlled by different constituencies that are in competition with each other, and I'm sure we can go across the board one war intervention, et cetera, and you can actually kind of take out the president altogether because I mean, what's been mentioned here so far, I would just define as the presidents are place figures to go down the path of least resistance.
Right.
It
Although,
seems like most of the time, at least.
yes, yes, that's true. I mean, and this is the paradox of the whole thing, right? Is that, there's a great article by Victor, no, pardon me, Jim Ostrowski, great libertarian writer. And it was about how, libertarians might like to pretend to think otherwise, but Article 2 gives an incredible amount of power to this president, right? He's the only one elected in the executive branch as chief executive. I mean, they don't even name the cabinet departments in there, right? He has the leeway to go very far on almost anything. If he puts his foot down, I mean, hell, he could launch nukes against the whole world on his own say so, right? The guy has ultimate power and yet is essentially a slave of his bureaucracies almost entirely. And depending on how powerful they are. So like if you have a guy like Dick Cheney, he knows what the hell he's doing. So he hires his neocons. They take control of the departments in the way that they are supposed to, including even put Harold Rode in the Office of Net Assessment to take over the Pentagon's think tank too. Like they left no door unbroken into, right? When they seized control of the state to get what they wanted. But that's very rare that you have an operator as powerful as Dick Cheney who knows what he's doing and has a network of men like the neocons who are going to click their heels and do exactly as they're supposed to do and play exactly the role they're supposed to play in the scheme. And it's very rare. So like when Donald Trump came in, especially the first time, he was just helpless. He's just surrounded by enemies, surrounded by official state apparatchiks who are just going to make sure that he stays right on that path. And
that's why they got rid of Michael Flynn
right.
instantly.
Exactly. With
But the curious
part of
thing
the
then
Russia.
about Trump is that it's some of Trump's fans are saying, well, he's being manipulated by others and so on, but he's running the show himself. I
Yeah.
mean, where's Marco Rubio? I mean,
Yeah,
he just sits there on the couch, never says anything. So he's
that's right.
running things, and yet the policy that he's pursuing is the sort of classic and even more belligerent neocon, so to
Yeah.
speak, foreign policy. He's not. It's
Well,
not. There's no more McMasters there. There are no more Rex Tillersons or anyone else. It's here, Trump, who's pursuing this.
yep.
Well,
And
you get the impression the only book that Trump maybe ever read in his life was about President McKinley. Because
yeah,
because I mean, with the exception of that, when he did his Gulf trip with that now kind of bizarre speech to the Gulf monarchies, that's very anomalous for this administration so far. But it seems like it's great power politics. It has like a late 19th, early 20th century vibe to it all.
right.
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
that's his instinct. It's impossible for us to tell,
Well,
where he gets his information
yeah.
from, all of this.
Well, look, okay, so a few things about that. I mean, first of all, I think it is fair to say, right, that this time around, he absolutely is in charge. And even I think what we call the deep state, the permanent national security establishment, mostly has rolled over here. For him to be able to come back and win again in 24, like, no, sorry, dude. You guys came at him. You threw everything you had at him. You tried to put him in prison and all these things. That's why, in great part, people voted for him. Is and so and he won the popular vote and the electoral college and every single swing state, and he has the mandate. And of course, he is also just that kind of a personality. He is very much the alpha dog. If he thinks he knows what he's doing, then he is the type to bark orders and tell people what to do, and
But
you're
Scott, could you
following
make the
that. So
argument
he
that
can
he's
play
in,
that role, you
could
know.
you make the argument that he's actually embraced the deep state? I mean, I think you can argue both
Well,
sides.
look, I was going to go back to what you're saying about McKinley there. That yes, I think like if you go back to you guys familiar with Walter Russell
Mead,
Reed Mead,
Mead,
yeah,
Mead.
the yeah. So he breaks down, and for your University of California students, they won't understand, but he breaks it down and says, well, you have in foreign policy, you have a Jeffersonian take, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, kind of a Ron Paulian foreign policy. And then you have Andrew Jackson, which is like, we will kick your ass and steal your land and steal your oil and all of these things. And then you have Alexander Hamilton, who's really just here to pay corporate welfare for his friends and doesn't really care that much who we attack. Maybe wants to set up a system of free trade that's friendly for big business in the world and that kind of thing. And then you have your Wilsonians, who get all swept away with their romantic visions of how we're going to remake the world and into a better place and all of this kind of thing. And then you have mostly a mix of the latter three and no Jefferson sitting at the table at all. And like, so if you're going to use those cookie cutters, Trump fits in with Jackson and a bit of Hamilton, right? He's got his corporate welfare guys and he's got his let's kick butt and take things. I mean, that was his complaint about Iraq, was that, and we didn't even take the oil. So what do we even do it for? And like he imagines this giant spoon, you're just going to scoop it all up and bring it over here and save it somewhere and sell it later.
But if you
And
use
so,
that, if you use that model, well, at least America's getting something out of it. Just like, okay, well, we've taken oil, we've grabbed this piece of land, fine. It's hard to see what exactly America gets out of, well, let's say Gaza, embracing Bibi Netanyahu. What does America get out of it? What does America get out of bombing Iran again, other than keeping in with Bibi? So
money,
it's hard to figure out what if you're going to
Well,
do that
lobby,
argument of, oh, we're going to take the oil
lobby.
and take the
Yeah.
land. Where's the oil? Where's the land?
and what's the benefit of going to war with Russia? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a couple things. So on the Gaza thing, is it's the same with Trump as with everybody. It's the lobby. It's the money. He gave a speech to AIPAC in 2016 where he goes, "You rich Jews, I don't need your money." People freaked out. He
Yeah.
goes, "I don't need your money. I'm already rich."
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh my God, that was so anti-Semitic of him to say," or this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But then he realized, wait a minute, dude, I don't need their money. But the Republican Party does. We have 535 seats up for election, and we have to hold on to as many of them as we can. Never mind the governors and the state reps and the state senators. And AIPAC may not back all of them, but they'll sure oppose one if he's a rising star who's against Israel. They'll intervene. on that level. And so, like, what is the operating budget of the National Republican Party every year? They are heavily reliant on major donors to keep that thing going, no different than the Democrats are. And so Donald Trump, and see, this is actually my frustration with the guy, because the New York Times did a thing where they said, look, he's not really worth $10 billion, but he is worth like four. And I have to tell you guys that if I had $4 billion and I was in my late 70s and my grandchildren are already guaranteed set for life, then screw you, man. I'm on a kamikaze mission. I'll pay personally. I will pay the entire operating cost of the Republican Party for the next 10 years. And then here's what we're going to do. Now you sons of bitches are beholden to me. And here's how we're going to do it. Right? He's got billions of dollars. He could handle this for a few hundred million and then make it back on the dividends from the rest of his wealth, right? Like he wouldn't even really lose it. And as corrupt as he is, he could just make a deal and get a kickback anyway. Like, right? Like, what's the problem? Go ahead. He doesn't really need AIPAC, but he wasn't willing to make that decision. And
how do you explain that? Because that's a very good question. We want to know the answer to that question. Why didn't he do that?
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I think he's really cheap. He wants somebody else to pay for it. Okay, I don't.
That's a lot of money.
He almost never spends his own money on anything. Okay.
Yeah. It would be a huge sacrifice, right? It would be. Yeah. I'm doing this, and see, the only reason I'm frustrated about it at all, really, is just, I mean, on the face of it, it's the obvious thing. But he actually said this at least once in the first campaign.
Yeah.
Where I'm poorly paraphrasing, but it was something like, "Look, man, I'm retired. I already won. I'm the most successful, tallest, most handsome, most wonderful guy in the whole world.
Your favorite president."
And that's why I'm the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, maybe better than him. And that's why I'm running, is because I'm doing this all like as a charitable thing, out of the goodness of my heart, to try to save the country that's been so good to me with the last little bit of my effort before I go away. And I'm rich enough that nobody can stop me. So screw you. Right. And Hillary goes, he's corrupt. And he goes, she's corrupt. She says, I'm a billionaire, so you can't trust me. I say, she's not a billionaire, so you can't trust her, because she's owned by other billionaires where nobody owns me. Right. And like, God dang, what a great line. If only he'd meant it. Right. And if only he had just, and boy, he could have won in an absolute horrific landslide all three times if he'd consistently run on that. That is what I'm doing here.
But even pushing against that, even ever so slightly, you get Russiagate. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Scott, one of the things that you're very learned. I've seen you in interviews, particularly the Tucker one, because it was long form. Your knowledge is vast, and when you look at all of these episodes. I mean, I call it the fallacy of common sense. I mean, you see, this could really go sideways if we're not careful. And as you point out, people are aware of this, okay? I mean, why don't we empower Muslim fanatics in Afghanistan? That would really screw up the Russia. But, you have to be careful with those people. Over and over again, common sense is alien to all of these conversations, all these hallowed think tanks, and all these other places that are stuffed with money from foreign governments and whatnot. I mean, common sense, because that's what you seem to be advocating over and over. Donald Trump's a billionaire; he actually could do. That's a common sense approach. It seems that's the minority position in how American foreign policy is made.
Yeah, that's right. It's also just special interests, right? It has nothing to do with the American people. And I think probably anybody would understand it. You say this to like anybody in your town. They're like, well, look, the Israelis and the Saudis and the Brits have a lot more say in our foreign policy than the American people do. Like, doesn't that even just sound right to you on the face of it? They're like, yes, of course they do. Like, why do we pursue this policy in Syria? Does anybody think that that's what's good for the people of Louisiana? That we back the bin Ladenites in Syria? No, this is because Israel and Saudi hate the Shiites. And since George W. Bush just put the Ba'ath Brigade in power in Baghdad, now we got to take Iran's friends out in Damascus. And so that has nothing to do with the good of the American people whatsoever, other than if you're directly an executive at a military industrial complex firm or, receive those dividend checks, but it's all at the expense of the rest of us. And of course, at the expense of blowback terrorist attacks against us. And I think, as I think of the 10 million different things I got to organize in my head to try to say to Lex Friedman today, like the most important bottom line of the conversation is that Israel is a national security threat to the United States. When America puts Israel first, the American people really lose. It's not just that they're wasting our money, but that's what gets Americans attacked in terrorist attacks. And they never face up to this, but this is the primary motive of the September 11th hijackers, and including even going back to the first World Trade Center bombing, is this is what you get for supporting Israel, and not just supporting Israel, but supporting Israel's wanton violence against the Palestinians and the Lebanese. And it goes all the way through to, there have been a hell of a lot of FBI entrapments, but there have been some real terrorist attacks in this country post 9/11 as well. And you take a look at Omar Mateen, who shot up the gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. They lied like the devil and said that he was gay. And so he hated himself because Islam makes you hate gay people. And so he went to kill all these people, whatever. Not true. And finally, they published his Facebook post and the transcripts of his 911 call. And it's all about Obama is bombing Iraq and Syria. And he's killing women and children in Syria. And why? And at the time this is taking place, Obama has already built the caliphate and has now launched Iraq War III to destroy it again. And so he's carpet bombing the crap out of Mosul and Raqqa and Kobani and all of these places. And he's murdering women and children in large scale numbers for Israel. This whole policy was about Israel. And Omar Mateen is shooting all these people to death. And they're sitting there, bleeding out as the cops waited for 4 hours outside in cowardly terror, recalled their heroic guys who were going in there to kill him, and forced them to come back. And then they breached the wall. And when all the people poured through the wall, the innocent captives poured through the wall, the cops machine gunned them.
Yeah. But the interesting thing
Orlando
is,
police.
as you outline it, so here's Trump, who is running on this platform, America first. Clearly, it's Israel first. He pretty much explicit, when he turns to Bibi Netanyahu when there's a question about the two-state solution, he says, hey, Bibi, you're the greatest expert in the world on the two-state solution. What's your take? So that's the America first. But then, he's been consistent since 2015 in saying that the biggest threat to the United States is China. So what is he doing about it? What's he doing about it? He's turning against Russia. In fact, he said, why should we be enemies with Russia? Russia should be our ally against China. So again, what he's pursuing now is the exact opposite of the policy that he had advocated and he promised. And by his own terms, it's obviously against the interests of the United States.
Right. Now, okay, so on the Ukraine question, yes, you're exactly right that he agreed. This is, again, not some Ron Paulian foreign policy. He stipulated this clearly, that he spoke with Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger reaffirmed to him that he's the tallest, most successful, most handsome guy to ever lead the presidency. And that, yes, he's right, that we should lure Russia west to divide them from China. This was the brilliance of Nixon and Kissinger's plan of splitting China away from the Soviet Union, the weaker power away from the stronger during the Cold War in the days of the communists. And so now, since China is the more powerful one, we want to keep Russia with us. And after all, it is a white Christian country. It might be the eastern frontier of the West, but it is still part of European civilization. And so they should be on our side, and we should keep the Chinese from having the Russians as a reliable partner, right? And that should be the goal. And so that was all what it was about. It wasn't about he was a slave of a blackmail P-tape or whatever. It was about he agreed with Henry freaking Kissinger, Rockefeller's guy. This was not, the most prominent Republican grand strategist of all. And then, but the other side of the split was, yes, it is all about China, but we can't lure Russia west because that mean old Putin is just too mean. So instead, we need to bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy in Ukraine, the way we did the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, strategically weaken them, bog them down, facing west into Eastern Europe to keep them from aligning too close with China, which of course is completely idiotic because that's just another way of saying you're kicking them out of Europe and straight into the Chinese arms, which is exactly what they did. And I may be the only guy who noticed this at the time. Like I don't know who all reads them, but I never hear anybody talk about it. But if you guys are familiar with the war nerd, Gary Brecher,
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so he's a brilliant guy. And he wrote this thing back
He had
in
something in
2014.
the Exile
Right,
newspaper with Matt
right,
Taibbi when he was here. Yeah,
right.
brilliant guy.
And so he had a thing. Oh hell, what was I gonna say? Oh, he had a thing in 2014 about how, hey, guess what, everybody? The Russians just opened a brand new pipeline to China. So the game is up. Europe can no longer blackmail Russia. They have options. So, welcome to the new world that we live in, where there's now a pipeline of natural gas and oil from Russia to China. So you can play your games and you can dangle carrots, but you're out of sticks.
Do
And
you know
they
what
just
that?
weren't
Do you know what?
listening.
Do you know what those pipelines are called? I love the name of it. Siberian Power. Okay,
There you
it's
go.
it's really. I really want. I want to go back to the Israel
Oh
and
wait, I was going to say real quick about Ukraine was that
I,
when Trump came in for his second term, he just has bad timing, right? I mean, the Russians since September of 22 have officially annexed 4 provinces. But as of right now, they only control all of one of them, although obviously they're making a lot of progress in Donetsk. But they still have what, like a third of Zaporozhye and Kherson to take. And in Kherson, it's on the other side of the river. And their strategy, according to the military experts, or many of them anyway, their strategy is to fight a war of attrition. In other words, they're not just trying to take land. They're moving slowly, trying to kill the other guys more so that then they can take the land when they feel like it, when the other guys are out of the way. They're trying to preserve their own guys by fighting that way, just raining artillery and moving by inches slowly here. And so Trump comes in and says, well, I want to call a timeout. Everybody stop fighting. And the Russians are like, no, dude, sorry, you shouldn't have started this war, or helped us start it, or push us into it, or provoke this thing the way that you did. You should have implemented Minsk too, pal, because now it's too late. And so Putin keeps picking up the phone saying, yeah, Donald, no, I hear you, and then shining him on. And so now Trump's getting pissed off and going, well, hey, you're supposed to do what I say, but he doesn't understand the dynamic of the thing. And he knows, and I guess he doesn't really realize that, as I had been saying for a very long time, that when it comes to adding more sanctions and pouring in more weapons, Joe Biden already tried that. So the only other option then is you're going to send in the 82nd Airborne or the U.S. Navy to intervene, or you're just not. And if you're just not, then the question is, how long is it going to take for Russia to win the war? And how horrible is it going to be for the Ukrainians? And as I say in the book, I think this is going to be a Pyrrhic victory for Russia. I think that Putin on his deathbed is going to regret that he ever went this far. I don't think he had to. I think, America put his back up against the wall, but not in the corner. And he thought it was going to be easier, I think, than it turned out to be. He thought Joe Biden was enough of a senile pushover that I think he maybe underestimated the way that the West would conjure its trillions to come to the support of Ukraine to the extent that they did. And you got to admit, not the tanks and all that, but the missile systems, the HIMARS and the ATACMS and whatever have made a bit of a difference on the margin for Ukraine. I mean, we're having this conversation in July of 25. They put up a hell of a fight for 3.5 years here because of Western support and prolonged the thing in such a way. So I just think that, and then one more thing about that, and I'll stop, is Putin said, okay, fine, I'll deal. The Ukrainians just have to turn around and walk away from the territory that they're standing on now. They have to give me what's left of Zaporozhye and Kherson that I don't control yet. And they're not going to do that, right? They're like, no, we're still standing on this ground. We'll leave when you kick us out, but we're not going to turn around and walk away from this ground. So they're not willing to give in to his level of demand. He has no real reason to give in to a ceasefire that stops him short of his officially stated goals. I mean, they passed a law that he signed saying that these 4 provinces are now part of Russia again. And so Donald Trump all he has is a good carrot to offer that, look, man, we'll drop all sanctions. We'll normalize relations. We'll bring you to the ball game and we'll all be friends again. And Putin's not going to go for that because he knows
but
it's a
that, but
fact
that,
that the
but
entire American political establishment disagrees with that, and it would not last beyond Trump's term.
yeah, but that's assuming that would be a genuine offer. I don't believe that would be genuine at all. I mean,
Well, even if it was,
given
I'm just
given
saying
the
it's still a good.
entire
You
given
know,
the entire corpus of your written material would tell me that you don't trust these people. Okay. I mean, we have to remember um, what was going on in December 2021 and going into January, where at one point Biden said that the Russians were panicking. I mean, you're going to send missiles into short-range missiles into Ukraine, and Biden apparently said, "No, we're not thinking about that." Then Blinken turns and said, "Oh, we're going to do whatever we want to do." Okay. Also, we had what looks like, by all accounts, by the OSCE, that the Ukrainian forces were going to attack the Donbass. So, I mean, this is, and if you look at the warnings in the last couple of weeks, I mean, it was pretty obvious who was spoiling for a fight. Okay, it wasn't the people of Donetsk and Lugansk; it was the Ukrainian forces. So, I don't think that there was a lot of choice right there. Okay, so if the special military operation hadn't happened, Ukraine would be officially be part of NATO by now.
Well, I'm not so sure about that part of it, but I mean, I
Well,
really don't think
it's speculation, but I
yeah,
think it's
but
possible.
yeah. And look, I do have in the book where Macron told Putin, do not give in to provocations. And I think that very well may have been a reference to Kiev is escalating in the Donbass. They're trying to get you to take the bait. Don't take the bait. And in fact, I even have a quote somewhere in there. I do have a quote where Putin himself says, I'm sorry, I can't get the quote exactly right, but paraphrasing, Putin says, man, I think their strategy might be to try to bait us into doing this. I think they want us to make this mistake. But then he went ahead and did it anyway. Maybe he thought he had no choice to, but he's
Well,
not a dummy. He could
you
see
know, it's
this.
heads you win, tails you lose. Either
That's right.
they take they push the Russians out of the Donbass, or they lure Russians in, and so it's a then Russia has a long, difficult, complex war on its hands. So it's a classic, which is kind of what Brzezinski did in Afghanistan in the late '70s. But just go back to a point you made. About Trump. Do you rule out the possibility that he would escalate in a dangerous and reckless way? It's like providing, let's say, Tomahawk cruise missiles to Kiev and say, "Hey, go ahead, really,
Yeah,
lob these missiles
be,
into Moscow.
be
Hit
careful,
Moscow."
Scott. We could turn this into a mini clip here, okay? Because this is the question everybody wants answered. Go ahead. No pressure.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I have to tell you that I think the risk of nuclear war has increased by probably single digits, right? I think there's a lot of counter incentive and on in both capitals to going that crazy or doing anything that dangerous. But I think if a nuclear war ever starts between the United States and Russia, the likelihood is that it would be due to a misunderstanding and an overreaction. And I think if you look at history, we can see where there are at least two different times on the record where Russian computers and satellites told the Russian military that we are under attack from an American first strike. And in both cases, what happened was the Russians in charge, the lower level officers, said, I don't know, man, that just doesn't seem right. We're getting along with the Americans just fine right now. They're going to do a first strike with 3 missiles because one of them was a Norwegian rocket. But when it separated, oh, and what happened was they warned them. They told the Russians, hey, we're launching a rocket today. But the word didn't get passed down the chain of command. Somebody's asleep at their desk or whatever, right? So when the rocket goes, it breaks into 3 sections, the booster sections and all that, right? So now they're tracking 3 objects and they think that there's 3 missiles coming at Moscow. And this one colonel says, you know what? I think I'm going to do a first strike with 3 missiles. You know what? Let me know if any hydrogen bomb explosions happen, and then I'll call the boss. And he decided to wait and see if they were actually getting nuked. He was going to wait and find out to see if if hydrogen atoms were being fused together over Moscow before he reacted. Well, if that same mistake happened today, he would not. Right? If we have Tomahawk cruise missiles flying in from Ukraine and you have Russian radar operators going, oh my God, Tomahawks flying straight at Moscow. Well, you very well could have someone in the chain of command assume that these are tipped with hydrogen bombs, which
That's why they were made.
Being, and which
That's
used to be illegal, but Trump tore up the INF treaty. And so now would even be quote unquote legal for the United States to station mid-range, intermediate range nuclear missiles in Europe, and we could have a misunderstanding. And I'll give you another example of this. Is if you guys are probably familiar with this new book that came out last year, Nuclear War: A Fictional Scenario, by Annie Jacobson, where she went and talked to all of the greatest nuclear warfare experts in America and in Europe, I guess too, but secretaries of defense, nuclear planners of every description, CIA heads, and all these things are all her sources that she talked to about how it could happen. And in her scenario, I'm going to ruin the book for you, everybody. In her scenario, it's North Korea nukes us, but they nuke us not just once, but twice. And once the second nuke goes off, then it's determined that, well, we have to wipe all of North Korea off the face of the earth, or this is going to keep happening, right? We might have even took one, but we're not going to take more than two. So they launch 50 nukes at North Korea. But the problem is they have to fly over Russia to get there. And the Russians are looking at the radars, and they say we have 50 incoming ICBMs from the United States. They're flying over Russia. And the Putin in the fictional scenario of the book says, I see what's going on here. They're going to nuke us. They're going to lie to the American people and tell the American people that it wasn't North Korea, but it was us that nuked them. And then they're just going to take advantage and get us on a first strike right now. Bam. And he hits his own red button and they launch 1,000 nukes at the United States. And then we're all dead because he says, you know what? I have a list this long of lies that they've told about me recently. And so you see what they're doing. You see what they're doing. They're going to blame it on Russia and they're going to wipe our civilization off the face of the earth because Korea attacked them. Those sons of bitches. But hey, would the Americans do that? Sure, they would. Right? Does anybody think that it's the 1990s and they wouldn't do that? We're friends. No, they don't think that. That whole spirit of cooperation. And even in the Cold War, there was a level of at least pretended respect and pretended acceptance of the other side's dignity and the kind of thing. They never really even talked. I mean, the people in power in the White House, they never talked about Stalin and Khrushchev the way that the Biden people talked about Putin. And so the level of
Scott,
acrimony there accounts for a lot. It really does.
Do you think that there's thinking in the United States that they could isolate some kind of escalation like that? Because if you're putting intermediate missiles, American ones, into Europe, it's centered on Europe itself. Because this would be, the Americans will never sacrifice Chicago for Vilnius, never, okay? Vilnius can go up into smoke. I mean, the reason why I'm saying this is spider web caper that they pulled off. They're trying to localize the conflict there and let the Europeans take the punishment because that's one way of playing cat and mouse with the Russians is that the Russians. This is the whole issue of restraint is something George and I have been discussing for the entire time of this conflict. Is that the Russians show an enormous amount of restraint. They don't take the bait of the escalation. But if we have these new missiles going into the Germans seem to be quite open to it. That's where the trigger could be. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just maddening. I mean, this is crazy. When I was a little boy, in the first 3 years or first 2 years, 2.5 years of the Reagan administration, there's real nuclear weapons brinksmanship with the Soviets. And the Soviets started it. The Soviets started building up I believe they were called SS-21, mid-range nuclear missiles.
SS-20
in Europe. And Ronald Reagan said, oh, yeah. And he started pouring in the Pershings in response, mid-range missiles into Germany. And said, well, we're not just going to match you. We're going to overmatch you. And then what are you going to do? We're going to make the MX missile too. We're going to do all this stuff. And then what happened was, and there are a couple of things about this, but this is a true story. Ronald Reagan saw the made-for-TV movie, the miniseries on ABC, The Day After, which has, for 1983 special effects, a pretty good representation of what it would look like to have Kansas City, Missouri nuked off.
And why was he watching it? Do you remember?
I think it was his daughter made him watch it.
No, he was in the hospital recovering from the assassination attempt.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, and then I think his daughter made him meet Helen Caldicott, who is this Australian anti-nuclear weapons activist as well. And I think, but they say that The Day After really scared the crap out of him and that he really realized it. Like, oh man, and almost like in a Blues Brothers way, he says, I'm on a mission from God. My job is to get rid of all of these things now. So then it was Reagan himself, the same guy who poured all the Pershings in, was the same guy who turned around and negotiated their withdrawal of every last one of them in the INF Treaty of 1987. And
But I should just say a couple of things. First of all, Reagan in 1976, when he was speaking at the GOP convention, spoke exactly about the threat to nuclear weapons. That was his big speech, the threat of nuclear weapons, and that we need to abolish all nuclear weapons. So he said this
oh,
in
really?
76. Yeah, yeah.
I
That
didn't
was
know
when
that.
he
That's
actually stood
interesting.
there at the GOP convention and spoke, abolish all nuclear weapons. And then the other thing is that it was actually Jimmy Carter who made that decision to deploy the cruise and Pershing missiles in
Oh, really?
response to the SS-20s. So Reagan was only carrying out the policy that had already been decided on
I see.
under Jimmy Carter. But
Well,
just going back, why I think this situation is so dangerous is there are an awful lot of people around whose goal is to provoke this world war. I mean, if you look
Yes,
at Zelensky's strategy is let's
of
provoke this
course.
world war. The Baltic states, let's provoke this world war. I don't know what the situation in Poland is. And then, of course, there are all the Lindsey Grahams and all the rest of them. So there are powerful voices who actually want this. They want this war. And that's where it starts getting very dangerous because if you have someone like Kaya Kallas, who is the chief foreign policy person of the EU, and who makes no secret of the fact that that's her goal to provoke a world war, then you're in a kind of a dangerous situation.
And to add to what George just said here, I think a lot of people live in a bubble when it comes to the information warfare. They just like in the West, Russia has its federal television stations. The Lindsey Grahams, Kalakalis, all of these people, they are presented every single night. Let the West speaking in their own words, and they subtitle it. They don't even dub it, they subtitle it, okay? And so every time Lindsey Graham opens his mouth, it's headlines here,
mm,
okay? And the West thinks that, nobody is actually listening outside of their
right.
power bubble, okay? And so educated people that flick on the news and just say, why do they hate us so much?
Yeah.
We had a wonderful conversation earlier with Sheila Fitzpatrick, George and I, the great Soviet and Russian historian. And she said in her own words today, said, well, and communism, you hated us because we were communists. Now communism is gone and you still hate us. Okay. And
Mhm.
so that's the mentality that people are fed. People talking about, Kremlin propagandizing its people. They don't have to do that. They just have to show the public exactly what is being said by Western leaders, by Ronald Reagan, I'm sorry, by Donald Trump, and everybody else. I mean, the cheapest form of soft power the Kremlin has is just let them talk.
Yeah. I think that's true, and I've been complaining for years and years. I don't probably read enough of these things, but occasionally I'll read these studies from the CSIS and whatever these different think tanks about what it would look like if we had a war with Russia or China. And you could read a whole study about it without the word nuclear in there at all, where they really have this imagination. What we'll do is we'll have a really fun conventional war. It'll be big and badass, way more exciting than patrolling Pashtuns in Paktika province, right? We're going to go over there and we're going to have some kinetic activity and all this. And then, but they just forgot that, like, yeah, no, but the scientists already figured out how to fuse hydrogen atoms together. And so that's why, no, we cannot fight Russia or China ever, no matter what. And so what are you talking about? And then, but they'll do that because if you look at it from their point of view, like just all public choice theory, the people writing the study, nobody's going to give them $30,000 for the study if they have a bunch of we can't do it because of nukes in it, right? So that's just dismissed in the first place. And then, they write the study and then you can see, like, in their mind's eye, like, and I get it because I'm a boy too, that like a really big, badass naval war in the Pacific would be a lot of fun to watch on TV later. Dude, you know what I mean? Like, if you think about the battles with the Japanese in the Pacific, like, this is some of the most exciting stuff in American history, man. You see that one where he dropped the bomb and it went straight through the deck of the aircraft carrier, blew it up and sank that son of a bitch, and like, woo, hoorah. And like, that would be awesome. Oh, except that China could erase all of our state's capital cities
You
and
know,
annihilate our civilization in a single day, even
Yeah,
with
and then if
easily
something like
sinking
that would
400 or
happen,
500 nukes.
if
you
something
know?
like that would happen, the United States would have the privilege to destroy the semiconductor industry of Taiwan.
Right. That's right. We'll never let you get those semiconductors that we put there for some reason 90 miles off of your coast when we could have built them in Austin in the first place, right? We already have advanced micro devices here anyway, right?
Scott, this is a really fascinating, really superb conversation. I really enjoyed it. Oh, I think our listeners will really enjoy it. So thank you very much for giving us your time. And we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. So
Keep
all the
up the
best.
good
All right.
fight. Keep up the good fight.
Exactly.
Thank you both very much. It's really great to be with you.
Thank you.